As Canadians, our national identity has long been tied to the vast and varied landscapes that define our country from coast to coast. Wild, untamed spaces, rich with diverse wildlife, serve as a source of inspiration, pride, and wonder. Yet behind the breathtaking scenery, a hidden crisis looms. Here in Canada, more than 2,000 species of plants and animals are at risk of disappearing from the wild. Our window to make decisions that will shape the coming centuries is rapidly closing. Will we act in time? And what is at risk to our own species if we allow the delicate web of biodiversity to be stretched beyond its limit?
Were it not for biodiversity, there wouldn't be us. From insects to reptiles, amphibians, birds, mammals, every one of those habitats, whether it's a wetland or a native grassland or a tame grass, riparian, forest patch, they each have a different component and a group of wildlife that live in those areas. So you can't take a grassland bird and move it into the forest and have it be happy and thrive. It can't. So that's why we need to retain that mix of different types of natural habitat to support biodiversity as much as we can.
Nature's rich variety of life is the most complex feature of our planet. Every living organism plays a critical role in producing the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. It helps to think of biodiversity as nature's safety net. The more diverse and finely balanced the system is, the more healthy and sustainable our planet remains.
We are still wild in Canada. We still have a lot of wilderness. In terms of farming happens in the southern strip of Canada because that's where the most productive soil is. It also so happens that's where most of our biodiversity is. So there is a real overlap. And about 90% of our species at risk occur within the agricultural landscape. That doesn't mean they're all living on farms, but they're living on the landscape that's shared with agriculture. So if we look at the types of production of agriculture there is in Canada, row crops are fairly highly intensive. You plant them and you harvest them every year. The perennial cropping, which is like grow a hayfield and just cut it and it just grows up again, or pasture for your cattle, that's very extensive production. The more extensive the production, the higher biodiversity is supported. I don't think we have an option of we have to feed people, therefore we can only farm intensively. I think there is a much more nuanced approach to that, and number one, we need to get a handle on food waste. If we can really bring that down, we don't actually need to be farming more land. There needs to be some intensification, but I think we don't need to intensify all of the agricultural landscape in Canada. We can have a balanced approach, and in fact, we need to have that. But it's a really important point. The producers that are sustaining those more extensive type of farming, as a society, we need to recognize that as much of that is a public service.
Between 2016 and 2021, Canada experienced the loss of 1.3 million acres of natural land designated for pasture, a situation frequently attributed to the outside pressures felt by farmers, from unpredictable weather patterns and market volatility to labor challenges within the cattle industry.
We can't blame a rancher who decides to not ranch anymore and convert their land because it's simply the matter of trying to make a good living. There's so many economic and risk mechanisms that make farming much more appealing economically, less risks. There are more support programs for things like crop insurance. And so all these pressures that a rancher faces, it really is a testament to many of the ranchers that are taking care of these lands to keep them that way because they are pressured and it is a risky business.
Canada's agricultural land, including cultivated crops and grasslands for grazing livestock, covers about 6% of the country. This farmland, with its wetlands, forests, grasslands, and streams, serves as vital habitat for many species, some relying solely on farmland for survival. Sadly, the total wildlife habitat capacity on agricultural land is shrinking rapidly, due to land conversion for crops and the development of roads, cities, and other human infrastructure. Habitat loss poses the greatest threat to any species. When parts of a habitat are destroyed, fragmentation occurs, resulting in smaller, disconnected areas of land that leave species with less space to find everything they need to survive, putting some species at greater risk of extinction. Due to ongoing pressures to convert natural landscapes, the proportion of wildlife habitat on beef farms and ranches has increased. Land used to raise beef cattle in Canada makes up 40% of all agricultural land. Yet it supports 74% of the wildlife habitat capacity critical for raising young and nesting, thanks to the symbiotic relationship between cattle and wildlife.
There are a number of drivers of extinction and species at risk. Habitat loss is a really big one. Species at risk, many of them have very specific habitat needs. So it could be a moth that has one species of plant that's the host plant, and if that plant goes, so does the moth.
Many of our species need large interconnected corridors of natural land to survive. And many of them, especially the ones like deer, elk, moose, bears, cougars, larger animals, can't necessarily survive on a pocket. They need an interconnected landscape. Recognizing the importance of these spaces that we have left, we all have to be aware of this. Conservation is what we try to do to recognize and protect those natural ecosystems, or as natural as they can be, from losing them, whether that's development or conversion. But it's also about managing their health, ensuring that we take care of invasive species, that we're restoring certain landscapes that have been affected, and that is all about stewardship.
I think partnership is really the important word. We do need to work in partnership with producers. We need to be careful about how we do things, when we do things, but I think it's really important to note that in all of what we do, it ought not to be off the backs of producers. Conservation needs to occur in concert with producers and not at their expense. We have a great need to interact and to support each other, so there is space for wildlife, and it doesn't mean we have to take productive land out of production. I think we can do things to elevate biodiversity on farmland, and that there is a really important stewardship role, and there are a lot of producers who are doing that.
Some of Canada's most critical habitat depends on the stewardship of ranchers, many of whom have cared for these landscapes for generations. Whether grasslands, wetlands, or woodlands, each requires thoughtful management to stay healthy. Through careful planning, ranchers ensure these ecosystems remain healthy working landscapes that support biodiversity and productivity. Across Canada, their stories of stewardship reveal the dedication, knowledge, and care that keep these landscapes thriving.
Mon nom est Victor Drury. On est ici sur ma ferme.
My name is Victor Drury, and I'm the second generation to raise beef cattle on this farm. Our perennial pastures are home for our cattle, but also home to many species of birds, insects, deer, and other wildlife. To improve biodiversity on our farm, we do a few key things. When we cut hay before July 15th, we attach a bar to the front of the tractor that has chains that hang to the ground. As the tractor drives, these chains flush out the birds so they're in the sky and not on the ground when the hay is cut. When endangered birds are nesting in our pastures, we also push back cutting hay and pasturing cattle until later in the season. This allows the birds to finish nesting and raising their young. By making these small changes, I'm able to maintain my production, but also improve the biodiversity on my farm.
This is not just my home and not just a place where I'm lucky enough to have my business, but it's a place where I get to feel and be part of the ecosystem.
When I talk environment, you talk about the different little ecosystems around you, like the stewardship. That's a different ecosystem than up there on the hill, you know. And all that creates life. It doesn't matter whether it's the bugs crawling on the ground or the or the bugs and larvae in the water, or the coyotes, the deer. It all takes a special environment and ecosystem for them to sustain. And that's what sustains life. That's the way this planet is formed. There's a purpose for every living thing on this earth. Wildlife balances itself out without too much human intervention. It's all a circle. You grow up, you go back. You grow up, you go back. That plant, it grows up, it goes back into the soil, to create life. And that's what it's all about. It's about leaving the land to look after itself, and it'll look after you. And that's how our First Nation people always were.
I think with species like large ungulates and predators, I think it's easier for people to understand the value of them on the landscape, but that little beetle plays a critical role for a songbird, which plays a critical role for a hawk, which plays a critical role. You can't divorce the loss of one species from, the negative impact for all of us and the environment in general. Rather than thinking about how I can master or dominate or domineer nature, it's how I can work with it, with my cattle, to mimic things like the bison would have done for hundreds of thousands of years, developing this beautiful grassland that we have here now. I'm just a very small piece of a really big ecosystem, and I absolutely feel responsible to the land and to the animals.
We are so lucky on this land to have a wide variety of ecosystems, so I was able to be exposed to a lot of different kinds of nature. We have a really endangered butterfly called the Baltimore checker spot. We have a very healthy population on the farm in the Ducks Unlimited wetland. My passion on the farm, a lot of it is with biodiversity stuff and conservation. And I think I'm really lucky that I grew up with a dad who was interested in that already.
It's important to have this natural diversity to try and help these species that, normally would be living here to give them an environment to make sure they still have a place to live. Without having the grazing in the way that we do it, things like bobolinks and willets and some of our ground sparrows would disappear. With a lot of our ground nesting birds, they like to lay their eggs sort of in early June, and it takes until mid-July by the time the young are up and actively out of the nest. So we'll graze some of the fields where we know that they are nesting in early to late May, and then we will leave those fields alone until the middle of July. And bobolinks they're just one of my favorite little birds when they kind of go around and do their little song. They're a lot of fun, but they also eat bugs. And they're an aerial insectivore, so that means they eat flying bugs, which are things like horseflies and mosquitoes and stuff that is also bothering our cattle. So it's one of those nice little, again, those synergies where nature works with us and we work with nature.
A lot of people don't necessarily connect grasslands to an ecosystem that is endangered. I think that when we think of an ecosystem, we think of something that's far away and kind of removed from Canada, but we have one of the most endangered ecosystems in our backyard here in Canada. The grasslands support over 60 species at risk in Canada. Grassland birds in the last 50 years have seen steeper and more steady declines than any other guild of North American birds. Burrowing owls are a grassland species. They're an endangered species across Canada. One of their biggest struggles is habitat loss. So the Manitoba Burrowing Owl Recovery Program, when we're working to improve habitat, we're prioritizing working with cattle farmers.
I'm 47, and as a kid, I just remember seeing a bird on the ground, an owl. I'm like, this is odd, but it would be 30 years ago. So yeah, they were here, quite some time ago.
Burrowing owls are the only North American owl that nest in the ground. There's natural burrows, right, that a badger or fox would dig, but the burrows that we put into grassland areas are called artificial nest burrows. They need the grass nice and short. They have a lot of predators because they are a ground owl. So working with cattle farmers, we prioritize areas that are grazed by cattle. So there's a great relationship between cattle and burrowing owls and a lot of other grassland species, because there's a lot of other grassland birds specifically that do nest on the ground and do need grazed grassland.
Without the cattle, the grass is overgrown, it's dead. The food sources aren't all there without the grazing animal to create the habitat for them to begin with. So it all kind of works unknowingly to us. Attracting that biodiversity or species is a win for everybody.
It's too small for a coyote. It's got to be a fox den. That's a score. It was a past year's den. That is very cool. We're learning from each other. Like, they may grow new eyes for seeing a bobolink, for example. I kind of didn't pay attention. Now I know what they look like, and now I know where they nest because I know what to look for. That's growing new eyes. For me, I grow new eyes about farming. The more I learn about practices and the constraints to producers, together we can find solutions that are going to work for everyone.
Wildlife biodiversity isn't here because of things we change. It's here because of happenstance of what we're already doing. We keep potholes, we keep the wetlands, we put up cross fencing to make sure that the grass has rest at certain times. We leave the silvopasture and the woodlots because it provides shade, but in that it also provides habitat. Cattle just naturally fit into the system.
We're living in an extraordinary time right now. Wildlife is part of us, and we're part of wildlife. We are walking along beside it, and very often we don't know it. We don't want farmers to be doing it all on their own. We need, as a society, to be supporting those efforts and really recognizing those efforts.
As the prairie bird's song grows quiet and the caribou's tracks fade away, a truth emerges in Canada. Every year, more creatures and plants join the list of those at risk of vanishing forever. To halt the tide of habitat loss and give our wildlife a fighting chance, we need a united front. It demands a coalition of ranchers, landowners, conservationists, all levels of government, and every Canadian, each recognizing the vital importance of nurturing our natural spaces. In this shared commitment lies a seed of hope, not only for the preservation of wildlife habitat, but for the mending of our collective relationship with the natural world that sustains us.